I really like these two readings today, and I've liked them for a while, particularly this first reading. I remember kind of learning something about it when I was in a Bible study at the University of Florida that kind of just changed my whole perspective on that story of the Lord and Abram, soon to become Abraham after this covenant they make in the scriptures today. And, in that very beginning, like the Lord comes to Abram and says, "Look up at the sky and count the stars if you can." Almost like this dare by the Lord, like see if you can do it. And you can picture just the vastness of the Milky Way, especially out there in the desert, how the brilliance of the stars, millions upon millions, too many to ever count. So shall your descendants be. This incredible reassurance that he would offer Abraham. But what's interesting is that then he kind of goes on this spiel, like, I'm the Lord, I brought you here, I'll give you this land, like go gather these different animals and we'll have a covenant. And so Abraham goes and spends the day collecting these animals, sacrificing them, and then it says, as the sun was about to set, they entered into this covenant. And it's like, well, wait a minute. If the sun was about to set then, after Abram had gathered all of these different animals and sacrificed them, when did God come and address him in the first place? And there's this total shift where we realize that when God came and said, "Look up at the sky and count the stars if you can," it was in the middle of the dang day. And Abram would have looked up and he would not have seen a single star. But were they there? Were they there? And then it says, Abram put his faith in the Lord, even though he couldn't see a single star, and the Lord credited it to him as an act of righteousness. This act of faith. The Lord came and challenged Abram. I know you can't see this plan right now. I know it's hard for you to imagine, just like you cannot see these stars. But just as you trust that they will reveal themselves tonight, can you trust me and follow me even if you don't have the full picture? And Abram passes this challenge of faith and chooses to walk with the Lord into the unknown. And so often, you and I receive a very similar challenge of faith by the Lord. I'm sure you can think of a time, I certainly can, where a thought, kind of something from our heart or spoken out loud, like, man, Lord, it's so hard for me to see you right now or see what you're doing. Gosh, I can't hear his voice right now in my life. I don't feel like the Lord is close to me. We're staring up at the sky and not seeing any stars. And the Lord invites us into this relationship of trust and faith. Just as you know that the stars will appear again at night, can you trust that I am with you right now in this sort of spiritual darkness that you're going through, and trust that I will reveal myself? Will you walk with me even though you can't concretely see or hear or feel me right now? And so often, I certainly do, I suspect I'm not the only one, I struggle to get that credit of righteousness that Abraham does. I struggle to follow the Lord and trust the Lord in those moments. So often, instead, we try to take things into our own hands and control things, sort of like we see with Peter. And this moment of grace, this moment of glory, the transfiguration, he immediately thinks of himself. Oh, Lord, it is good that we are here. We can build tents. And in those moments when we get stressed, we can get a little freaked out by our spiritual darkness or confusion. Ooh, I can craft something for myself here. I can work my way back into the Lord's good graces. I can figure out this prayer life for myself. If the Lord's not going to speak to me, I'll kind of carve my own path. We try to take things into our own hands. Or we can behave like the Christians that St. Paul speaks to in the second reading, where we can become enemies of the cross. We run from that place of darkness or suffering, and we create these artificial lights in our life. St. Paul talks about their God is their stomach. They turn to earthly things instead of him. How often in those times of anxiety or when we're in that shadowy place with the Lord, struggling to figure out where he is, we turn to food or drink or other people or screens or distractions or temptations or comforts. We create these lights for ourselves, these fake lights in the darkness, instead of trusting the Lord and following him. The darkness of our spiritual life, those cloudy moments, can terrify us. And yet, and this is my favorite part about the readings today, where does God show up most clearly in the passages we receive today? If you go back to Genesis, he gathers all these animals, the sun was about to set, and it said, a trance fell upon Abram, and a deep, terrifying darkness enveloped him. And when it was dark, there appeared a smoking firepot and a flaming torch, this light of God the Father forming the covenant with him. In the dark, a deep, terrifying darkness. That was where the light appeared. In the same way, we have this beautiful story of the Transfiguration. They see Jesus in his glory talking with Elijah and Moses. And then after Peter speaks, it says, while he was still speaking, a cloud came and cast a shadow over them, and they became frightened when they entered that cloud. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, this is my chosen son, listen to him. It was not in the moment of glory that the Lord spoke to them. It was when the cloud came, when the shadow was cast, when the fear entered in. That was when the Lord spoke most clearly. It was in the deep, terrifying darkness that Abram entered into with the Lord in trust when the covenant was forged, when he saw God most clearly. And so often in our own lives, it's in this moment, these seasons of darkness, if we're willing to walk into it with trust with the Lord, that is where we see him in new and incredible ways, if we are willing to enter the darkness with him. We enter now, or we have entered already, this season of Lent, which is in many ways a season of darkness. The lights are slightly dimmed here at Christ the King. It's darker in the morning when you wake up, but there's also this sort of interior darkness as well. We go out of our way to extinguish these artificial lights that we create for ourselves. We fast or turn away from these distractions or comforts that we so often turn to instead of God himself. And it creates this space that can sometimes feel a little tense or a little heavy. It can dredge up some interior darkness in our life where we see the darkness of our sin or our brokenness or our fear. And the Lord invites us more deeply into this season. Why? Why does God invite us into the darkness of the season of Lent? Why does he invite us so often to enter into those dark places of our life, of our spirit, that we would rather tune out or ignore? I think the readings very clearly show us today. He invites us into that darkness, no matter how scary it might be, because he is there with us. And he desires to forge this relationship of trust with us that he did with Abram. It's in the darkness where everything else is stripped away, where our eyes can finally adjust to the light. We become attuned to the light that was always there, but maybe we couldn't see it. The stars that were shining the whole time. We can see with greater clarity the light who is our God. The Lord is our light and our salvation. And if he is our light and our salvation, of whom can we be afraid?